Cape Town. We really appreciate your attendance and a great turnout this morning. Welcome to the first in our series of Rebuilding Our Economy. I think a lot of you will have seen correspondence from the presidents, and today's event is brought to you on behalf of all four chapters and the presidents of those four chapters. I think as presidents, we kind of got together and as the boards of the South African chapters and kind of looked at what was happening in our country and thought that there was an opportunity for us to support each other and to support you in terms of what's happening in our country at the moment. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of fake information, and there's a lot of rumors, and there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of despondentness as well. I know some of you, even on this very call, have had their businesses affected drastically and dramatically by the unrest that we've experienced over the last couple of weeks. The idea behind these events are really to support each other and to get information from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And without further ado, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Lumkile Mondi. Lumkile, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I've got a short bio here. It won't do justice to his status, and we're really grateful for you to join us in EO today. Lumkile is no stranger to EO. He's also no stranger to many households, often seen and giving commentary on ENCA. Dr. Lumkile is a lecturer at the School of Economics and Finance at WITS, and his research interests include political economy, macroeconomics, competition, regulation, and public sector economics. Dr. Mondi has got a PhD.
Jos, you're on mute.
Oh gosh, have I been on mute the whole time?
No, not the whole time. Just the last 20 seconds.
Oh, sorry, I must have just pushed the
button.
He has a PhD.
Yes.
Okay. So Dr. Lumkile has got a PhD in the University of Witwatersrand and an MA Economics from the Eastern Illinois University in Charleston. Lumkile, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for following me. Good morning, in the nation.
So maybe just without further ado, I'll pass over to Lumkile. You're here to listen to him, not me. But if you guys have got any questions, this is meant to be an interactive session. So please post your questions on the chat. If you'd like to just ask a question directly to Lumkile, please just raise your hand and I'll try and get through all the questions. We do have until 10:30. And without further ado, I'm going to pass over to you, Lumkile. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I managed in the pandemic, despite all the restriction, to find myself in the US in mid-April and up to the end of May. So I came back end of May. The reason why I had to find my way there is that my wife had been there since 2019, before the pandemic started, pursuing a master's degree funded by the Americans through the Fulbright program. And she was graduating early May. So I had to find my way there. So the reason why I'm sharing this is that I had never seen America having such high demand for low skilled jobs. All the resident sector, the hospitality sector, including the food sector and the logistics sector as well, was looking for people to employ. This phenomenon, I was in Georgia, just so that those of you who are familiar can locate yourselves geographically. I was in Georgia at a small town called Athens, where the University of Georgia is located. And what struck me when I was there was really the impact of what the American government had done. Firstly, the stimulus support of supporting businesses, big and small, and then also of giving household cash. And in Georgia, which is a Republican state, it's referred to as a worker state, despite the fact that there's no union in Georgia. We're not allowed to organize, but it's called a worker state. But in Georgia, being a Republican state, the governor was very concerned about the lack of potential job seekers. And he blamed the support to household that had been given by the Federal Reserves. And he passed a law to ban any form of support going to household, with a view that people will then go to the labor market and look for jobs. I've been following what's going on in Georgia. Seemingly, it has not turned around at all. So there's a big debate among economists in the US, because it's not only a Georgian phenomenon, it's across the nation. So the question that's being asked is this a temporal phenomenon, or is there a structural change taking place in the American economy? That is, firstly, are individuals not willing to take jobs for other reasons? What is driving that lack of job seeking? Is it only the stimulus or not? So I'm putting this across because the stimulus package that the Americans have injected into the American economy has been phenomenal, just in terms of driving growth. America is expected to grow this year at about 7%. For an economy of that size, this is huge. And hence, the discussions around America, around inflation, there's a fear that the American economy is going to overheat. Similarly, with that growth in America, we saw in Europe similar behavior by governments, of them injecting billions of cash into the economy to try and support business as well as households, to ensure that no one goes hungry during the pandemic, given the lockdowns that had been applied across the world. So what I'm trying to put across here is that the global environment is full of cash. There is restocking across many industries. And fortunately, that is hugely beneficial for commodity exporting countries such as South Africa. So South Africa is experiencing a huge recovery, not as close as the one that you saw between 2001 and 2007, but many of our mining companies, Sibanye, Stillwater, Anglo-American, many others, are currently sitting lots of cash, given some to the receiver of revenue, and more important also to their shareholders. So we are really seeing a very positive environment that will allow export looking companies in South Africa and the rest of the continent to exploit this buoyancy and this strength that we're seeing in the global economy. Of course, as I've said, there are fears that this huge demand in the global economy may stimulate price hikes, therefore lead to inflation. And we know that many central bankers hate inflation. When they see inflation, they'll hike interest rates. So there's a big debate amongst us economists whether is there a structural change? Are we in a different environment completely? Or this stimulus will lead again to hyperinflation and therefore erode a lot of wealth that's being created at the moment in the global scene. So South Africa has been poised really and well positioned by the commodity boom. As we've seen, with the mining sector, as I've mentioned, driven by a demand, not only in China, but across various nations of our commodities, be it platinum, mainly, or iron ore. Things are very, very good within the mining stock of South Africa. Of course, there's a big linkage in South Africa between our mining as well as our manufacturing sector. So you may see in the latest figures that our industrial sector, manufacturing, has also rebounded. Some of you who are following the upstream, the historically state-owned steel company, ArcelorMittal, which has been bleeding for the past 11 years, suddenly reported a profit, indicating to us that there is some buoyancy and recovery that's taking place within South African economy. And a lot of it is driven by the presidential economic reconstruction and recovery plan. So that pillar and the deal that the president has cut with business, of course, through institutions such as the National Economic Development Labour Council, NEDLAC, as the Business Unity South Africa, Business Leadership South Africa, Small Business Institute, trade unions, and broad society, which has led to this economic reconstruction and recovery plan with serious structural reforms being announced from the ICT sector that talks to the spectrum, as well as the transition from analog television to digital television, and the whole reform of the ICT sector. But more importantly, also the introduction and transition on the energy side, away from coal into renewables, as announced in the emergency procurement program, independent producer procurement program by the president, where he pulled the carpet under the Minister of Minerals and Energy, Mr. Mantashe, who was reluctant to make changes and still was looking at only 5 megawatts embedded generation. And the president moved because of the reality that for us to grow, we need a really resurgent and strong economy. And energy security is a pillar of that. Therefore, the 100 megawatt announcement by the president was to try and ensure that with this recovery driven by commodities, South Africa does not have power outages. And the work that's been done by ESCOM leadership has been phenomenal. I think Director Andre has done a phenomenal job. Invested quite a lot on maintenance, as we've seen that arguably the winter has not been very severe, but we've had very little disruption in the past 3 months. Usually the winter is our most difficult period, but the investment and leadership that's been shown by the executive at ESCOM has been phenomenal. Of course, even the restructuring of ESCOM is going fairly well, with ESCOM generation, transmission, and distribution having now been divisionalized as 3 separate entities. The next leg that we're expecting is really the corporatization of these entities. There's a huge discussion taking place at the moment that relates to the debt. It is really one of the biggest challenges for ESCOM because many institutional investors who are holding ESCOM paper want to know where or which entity will be able to repay them. And there's a whole exercise being done at the moment to look at climate facilities that can be used to refinance ESCOM and create certainty to the funding of ESCOM, as well as those institutional investors holding paper of ESCOM, so that they don't call on their exposures and lead to a collapse of ESCOM, but can hold on because the entity of Eskom that's been restructured and holding the debt is able to service the debt that Eskom has and the new debt that Eskom will be taking up. So some of you are following that restructuring. You may be aware that Eskom currently is engaged with about 5 development finance institutions: the African Development Bank, the New Development Bank, the so-called BRICS Bank, and many others, including the French, to try and see whether can they provide cheaper finance to Eskom to enable it to transition. So the idea there of raising that debt is to mothball quite a number of those inefficient, polluting the plants of Eskom, which are very, very old, and replace them with new infrastructure for generation based on renewable energy. So Eskom is talking about gas, is talking about solar. So we remain to see how that's going to happen. So if you look at the economic restructuring by the president through the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, there are those positive that I'm mentioning that we have seen coming through. There are enormous gaps that needs to be done. So within those positives, we have seen the slow process and incompetence in some of the departments. The most glaring and the most that touched all of us here today, particularly our colleagues in this meeting coming from KZN as well as parts of Gauteng, are really the continuous internal politics of the ANC, where there seems to be a continuous contestation within the ANC about the control of the ANC and therefore the control of the state. And unfortunately, some of those elements that are contesting with a radical economic transformation head. Is that a question? Jess?
Yes. So there is a question perhaps leading into what you're talking about now, Lumkile, is just any insights on the cabinet reshuffle, and I guess to what extent...
I'm setting it up.
Getting there, I thought as much.
I'm setting it up. Any other maybe that relates to my earlier comments?
And then there's just a question on, I'm massively optimistic about our country, but would love something on Stella Ndabeni as Minister of...
I'm going there. I'm going there. Okay. No, those are, I'm going there. I thought let me prepare everyone before I get there. I'll get there very quickly. Sorry. So I was saying that, despite all those positives that we've seen on the Eskom side, but also on the energy side specifically, including Eskom, we have seen quite a lot of gaps within the reconstruction and recovery plan. And a lot of it has to do with some dissatisfaction with some within the cabinet by some of the members who allegedly are still harboring the past. By that, I mean, they had it going very good under Zuma. As ministers, they'll do as they like. So if the procurement opportunities, they'll be able to use their influence as politicians, as ministers, and nudge their DJs to give those opportunities to their preferred business cronies. So that behavior and the fact that the president has tried to an extent to clean that old behavior with very little success, that the only way that they could carry out the process of reclaiming and contesting the president was really undermining the state. And that happened through key ministries, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Police and the State Security, that's the intelligence arm of our government, where there was information available, and in fact, it was not the events of July, but it's been a continuous erosion of key infrastructure by politically linked cadres of the RETs, known to the security personnel of our country, the intelligence community. So the destruction of railway, for example, of commuter railway, where Sowetan, for example, who want to have a choice of the mode of getting to Johannesburg CBD. Previously, they could take a bus, Rea Vaya, take a taxi, or take a train. Today, there's no train, commuter train services in Soweto whatsoever. Similarly, we've seen in the city of Cape Town, there was a continuous campaign of touching and destroying some of the infrastructure in the city of Cape Town, where trains were unable to get to the township. And what you've seen is that on the pairway, there's been informality of residential housing on top of the pairways. So this was known to the security personnel. So was a very strategic export corridor of South Africa, all the way from Lumumbashi, the eastern part of Congo, and the western part of Zambia, where truckers move key strategic renewable inputs. They move cobalt, they move copper, down all the way from Lumumbashi, western Zambia, down to Zim and Botswana, into South Africa, into the port of Durban. And key food supplies that move through N3. That corridor was attacked not only in July, in the past 4 years. There's been a campaign by radical economic transformers to really undermine food security, undermine our export sector by making it very difficult for truckers to move into the port of Durban, or coming up with food supplies to the biggest economy in South Africa and one of the biggest in the continent, in Gauteng, to make sure that there's some insecurity around food. And that was happening under the watch of security personnel and security intelligence, with no action being taken. Just to reinforce that the campaign of undermining governability and the constitutional state had its roots far backward. So since Zuma was ousted, there's been a campaign known to the security forces of radical economic transformation cadres sympathetic to the looting and destruction of a constitutional state, with the support, because they took no action, of our intelligence and our broader security establishment. And that then, unfortunately, became very, very vivid to everyone as this insurrection and undermining of a constitutional state when former President Zuma was arrested, where they saw an opportunity, the radical economic transformers, to really ignite our nation, which you saw happening in KZN. And I'm sorry to many of our members here today who might have been affected by the destruction of their property and loss of stock due to this arguably state-sponsored destruction of key infrastructure, of shops and livelihoods of thousands of South Africans, and threatening our entrepreneurial culture that still remains and committed South Africa. So that really has been a key weakness in the reconstruction and recovery plan of President Ramaphosa. So what was done exceptionally by the president, because the president was being set up to intervene by force. So there were many of those who were sitting and saying, you know what, we've got the army, we've got the cops, go and shoot the hell out of these people, which was what the radical economic transformation insurrectors were expecting. They expected a very heavy intervention by some of our security, and then that will then allow an opportunity for the army, for some of the elements in the army who are radical economic transformers to intervene because there's lawlessness. So when the citizens are being shot by cops, and then the country is burning, not only those two areas that we're all familiar with, but the whole country becomes ungovernable. That will have allowed the army then to intervene and call and suspend the constitution and the constitutional order, and have a new order that is military run, as we've seen elsewhere, in our neighbors in Zimbabwe and elsewhere. Unfortunately, I think the president acted very, very, very well. He's been under a lot of criticism that why didn't they act? Why didn't they use all the regulations that we have? But I think the fact that he allowed this process and applied his mind was the best intervention under the circumstances, because anything else would have really played in the hands of those who were willing to again repurpose a constitutional order into a fascist, bureaucratic, authoritarian, military rule dictatorship. Because the politics was there within the cabinet and then outside. So, what did this?
Doctor, can I ask you a question quickly?
With pleasure.
So I understand all that, and thank you so much. Can I just ask you just to go back to the infrastructure regarding railway lines and transport? And you're saying, is that the previous government that was trying to destroy that? I maybe misunderstand the link there, misunderstood it?
Yes. So the radical economic transformation plan, maybe let's start there, because I just assumed that everyone was familiar. So the plan really is to try and transform the economy into the hands of Black people.
Okay.
The Zuma government, because they had control of the constitutional institutions, so what they did basically was to repurpose state institutions. So your police, your National Prosecuting Authority, your SOEs, state-owned companies, they were all undermined and repurposed so they could be controlled by radical economic transformers. So Zuma, Guptas, and many Black businessmen and women were all in it to try and take control of the constitutional order by undermining that. So the next stage was to try and amend the constitution, specifically section 25. So once your constitutional order is weak, you then go to your constitution. Section 25 is amended. As it is amended to allow the seizure of property without compensation, you are very close now to knocking at Jos Dutrovo's business and say, "Good morning, Mr. Dutrovo. Give me the keys and get out of this business. This business is now mine." So the interest of this elite was really to take the economy, because the argument which they put, which Zuma always put on the table, was that the constitution is a big hindrance to the transformation of the economy. Therefore, as he used to argue, we are Africans. We have to do things the African way. That's sort of Zuma's sort of arguments of putting it. So when they lost the elections in within the ANC in December 2017 at Nasrec, they were then faced with what's to be done. And what they planned to do was to undermine the constitutional order. So the havoc that we've seen taking place, as I was describing, around the trucks, this everyone knows, as I was describing, that this is an amazing export chain. Remember, we benefit immensely, South Africa, of the cobalt, copper, and other commodities that come through our ports. But also, our neighbors earn hard-earned revenue, hard currency that they get through these exports. So those that were engaged in these activities knew exactly what they were doing. It's economic sabotage, undermining the constitutional order, and therefore ferment dissent to such an extent that you can seize power. In this case,
and Dr. Mondi, so that makes so much sense. And then, so the radical transformation of the economy was on its way, and then Mr. Ramaphosa stepped in. And the question I was going to ask you: has he, in your opinion, managed to halt some of that? Okay, it seems like he's got a lot to do. And then the second question was, if in the next few weeks they do more or attempt more, let's call it protest action that can go dangerous and destructive, will the state need to be more firm without it being, lawless and play into their hands?
So I'll answer those two questions as I go along. So if I do miss them, please come back. I'm sorry to do this to you. So I'm going to answer them now. So basically, I was saying that the so-called lack of action by the president was a very well calculated one, because then, arguably, some of you might argue that you are forced to protect what is yours, which we saw many communities are doing. Saying, what, we protect our own. You're not protecting your own because of any reason, but you know that there is a tomorrow. That, even if there could be any looting, but to destroy what we have, tomorrow we may regret it. So many communities rose across the nation to say, we shall protect ours, because they thought about tomorrow that, it might be nice today to loot and burn, but tomorrow you need bread. As we have seen, the hardship that is being experienced at the moment in many parts of rural KZN. I'm told, people were commuting from rural town in KZN to Eshowe with huge difficulties. In fact, many of Eshowe shops, I'm told, were destroyed. Maybe someone can share with us here who is based in Eshowe. But I'm told, many of the rural communities now are paying 3 times the amount of money to get to the next town to secure supplies, which is now starting to bite. People are realizing that, what, maybe it was not such a good idea for us to loot and destroy. But so the policy lessons out of this was, therefore, with the destruction as well as what was to be done question, remain in many of us as analysts' mind. As clearly, Mr. President, you've got enemies within your cabinet. So there is no way that you would have seen this coming. There's just no way. Many of us saw it coming, were talking about it on television, writing about it, and nothing was being done. And also given the communication that we have today and how easy it is to intercept if you are a security personnel, any information. I know it's illegal, but people can intercept. So with all that, the state having that monopoly and that capability, they should have known what's going to happen. So it clearly, to many of us, indicated that there was some form of coup, but being done at low intensity within that. One thing I didn't say, just going back to radical economic transformation, was that also this radical economic transformation was going also to spread into the judiciary. All of us are aware that the judiciary has been exceptional, just in terms of acting within its own mandate, given our constitution. But there were people, the shoppers of justice shoppers of this world, and many others who had bought into radical economic transformation and were busy within the judiciary trying to influence judgments, and in the process undermine the last pillar of our constitution, which had remained resolute under Zuma regime. Remember, the parliament had been destroyed. The ANC, basically, backbenchers, agreed with everything the Zuma regime wanted to do, despite the evidence which was there. And some of us who became active under Save SA during that period were seen to be agents of the American regime. They know who our handlers were during that period. But Parliament was completely repurposed. So was the state itself repurposed. The only pillar that remained was the judiciary. And fortunately, with the Nasrec events, we had managed to bring back, and the president was trying to clean up without disturbing the party. But the events of July showed him that he had to be seen to be acting in the interest of the republic than the interest of the party. So yesterday's events were long overdue. So many of us, when he announced the movement to stage 4 again, we thought he was going to talk about a cabinet reshuffle, and he didn't. So we've long been expecting him to reshuffle his cabinet. Really, the main reason why that cabinet needed to be reshuffled emanated from his choice of candidates after the elections. Remember, he had won in 2017 at the ANC National Elective Conference. And then after that, he had gone into to become a president temporarily, just to finish the last part of Zuma, and kept more or less the same people. And then there was a general election, which now he had a free reign to change his cabinet. And he didn't, because in his mind, for some reason, he believed that the regime change within the ANC will lead to everyone believing by the president that will share the same interest, that is, of unifying the ANC and therefore unifying the country and taking the country forward. It was not to be. So when he appointed these ministers, many of us were shocked that these guys were part of the Zuma cabinet. Why are they there? They're corrupt, they're unaccountable, they want radical economic transformation, which is not going to get us anywhere because it's an elite capture of the state with no interest of the republic. So, but he took that decision anyway. So it was very clear to us that something had to give. I think the events that have led to where we were over 3 weeks ago were really the gains that the president made. Firstly, through rebuilding of the state. So what is done very, very well was to start with rebuilding our prosecuting arm. So getting Shamila there and giving the National Prosecuting Authority its own space to do the investigative work and prosecute has given that entity some teeth and capability. I know they're not perfect, but they're independent and they're trying to do the best. So as they close in slowly on the radical economic transformers like Ace Magashule, for example, it was becoming clearer that if they come for Ace Magashule, then they can come for Zuma. If they come for Zuma, then they'll come for Lumkile, etc., etc., etc. So it is very, very clear that half of the ANC elite within the NEC and some in the cabinet are likely to be jailed. So therefore, it's easier and tempting to get into coalition of undermining a constitutional state without showing your hand, with a view that that threat of collapsing constitutional state will lead to a form of compromise where everyone will be forgiven. We all shake hands, so no one goes to jail. So the noise that you are hearing from the RET today is a noise that says, you know what, Zuma we need a political solution. So the ANC in KZN, all of it, from its branches across, is caught up in this view. And hence, it's allowing its members to march every other day to state institution demanding the release of Zuma. So there is a hegemony within the ANC there in KZN that we must cut a political solution. A political solution means basically no one gets arrested, no one is detained for the mess of the past few weeks. We all shake hands and then we move forward. That's sort of what they are trying to do as a compromise. So there's a whole lot of work that's being done by that. So let me move now to yesterday's announcement, which will address some of the questions that have been raised. Firstly, we were very excited when we got the message yesterday afternoon that the president was going to announce the reshuffle, was going to have a press conference. So all of us we guessed that it's about the reshuffling, which is long overdue. So we're excited. We were I was expecting. I spoke to Mukiti yesterday, and I think that Maseko, I think we're going to have some form of a rebirth, a new Ramaphoria coming, the really new dawn emerging. So I was very positive because I thought this guy has been put so much under pressure, and these sharks that were another agenda are going to be completely pushed out, and the president then is able to carve the new dawn, the reconstruction recovery with a much more broader support, not only through the ANC, but by taking some outside the ANC, including some business people, into his cabinet for what is being seen as a reformation and recovery strategy of the president, given the threat that the constitutional order faces and the challenges of the economy that you all know that the country faces. I was very disappointed. I was very disappointed first because in the economic cluster, I didn't expect Kodongwane to be the Minister of Finance. Here's why. Mr. Kodongwane is a former trade unionist from East London, cut his teeth at the Mercedes-Benz plant there. And when former President Mandela was released from prison, he was one of the workers that built or assembled a new Mercedes-Benz for former President Mandela to move around as a VIP after he was released. And given the ANC COSATU South African Communist Party alliance, he managed to rise within the ranks. He was a member of the provincial administration as an MEC for economic development under Premier Balindlela, and he was fired there because of misdemeanor and allegations of corruption. And then he came and moved to the ANC head office, playing a bigger role in the economic transformation committee of the ANC, the so-called ETC. And himself, Ibrahim Patel, and others got involved because of the change in law that came in the 80s around provident funds, where unions were allowed to have control of their members' provident funds. And Kodongwan and his partner got embroiled in a scandal where over 100 million was siphoned out of the workers' pension. In fact, when he got appointed as the deputy minister, someone asking a question? Hello, is someone asking a question? I had an interference. Just
you can go ahead and maybe post your question on the chat. Thanks.
Yeah. So he got embroiled in that scandal. In fact, when he became the deputy minister of trade, industry and competition, the DTIC, under Minister Patel, that issue, there's an inquiry and review. He had to resign urgently and pursue private interest. So South Africa is running about a debt to GDP of about 82%. So in a rand, 82 cents goes towards servicing our debt, including paying interest and capital. So you'll expect that position to go to a very competent and checkered individual who is going to be a Minister of Finance under the most difficult economic conditions and difficulties with state finances, very similar to what the ANC itself had inherited in 1994 and brought in Trevor Manuel, who was willing and able to learn and really embark on reversing a highly indebted South African government. At the time, 1994-95, our debt to GDP was about 65%. 65%. So by 2007, our debt to GDP was about 26%. We're running a budget surplus. And that budget surplus that we're running became very handy in the global economic and financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. We use it to support business, to support the state departments, particularly in key social welfare areas. We use that surplus to do that. So what I'm saying is that we needed someone, a solid individual, understand finance, who does never check out past, because that individual is going to be negotiating on behalf of South Africa Inc. in restructuring our debt and rescheduling our debt. And I'm concerned with that aren't we going to find ourselves again, him taking something and a margin in the structuring of our debt? So it raises quite a lot of questions. I know many of our colleagues in financial markets, and some of you might be excited that at least he is no radical. You won't talk about the Reserve Bank nationalization or anything of that sort. So therefore, given his ideological stance, he is the right person for the job. Yes, he may be the right person for the job as far as those are concerned. But as far as management of the public purse is concerned, I am worried. And I don't think I'm the only one who is worried about his commitment to the constitutional order, his commitment to ensuring that there is fiscal accountability and prudence. I'm worried about that. So that's the first area of my concern. The one area that made me very excited, amongst others, was firstly that we've got a very competent minister at last in the telecoms area. Remember, many of us have been complaining about the spectrum, have been complaining about us being stuck in analog technology for our TVs and other forms of telecommunication. So that's been an issue for us. So this shift, this change, by bringing in Chabeni there, we think we're going to have more transparent and much more speed around the ICT transformation, the digitalization, as well as the widening of the spectrum. We think that's going to happen very, very fast. We are very worried about Minister Selandabin because we thought, again, similar to the former Minister of Health, Dr. Mkhize, she was trying to play the same game within that function, but not around the spectrum. We thought people were lining up themselves to get ready. There is no worse decision by her than allowing Mark Barnes to leave as the CEO of the Post office. Mark Barnes had brought stability there, and he was trying to reposition the post office with a banking license to try and play a much bigger role there. Now we know that the post office is in a far worse position than when Mark Barnes left it. So that shift, or that removal of Stella Ndabeni came too late, unfortunately. Now we are in trouble, those of us who are active in small business. She is in the small business portfolio. We all know that small business Africa has long been neglected. Many of you just carry on with very little state support. Those of you who are in rural towns know how hard it is to get basic services from municipality, but also the support that you need, to try and support you, ensure that if you're using generators or you're collecting your own water and you want some form of support as a small business because you employ so many, it is very, very, very hard. So many of you work from your pocket to try and support the business. In fact, when some of the responsibility that could be done by the state through the cooperative government ministry, that Zuma Dlamini, or through the Department of Small Business Development, and now Ndabeni, could be done. So we remain very concerned. I mean, I work with Small Business Institute. We remain very concerned. We're happy to have her there, but we're very concerned about her competence and understanding of the small business and you guys, entrepreneurs. Whether is there going to be change? We're very unhappy with the former Minister Zulu. And let's see. I mean, let's give her a chance. So we'll give her a chance. But we do have serious issues around small businesses, and hoping that maybe she'll be ready to listen, to learn, and really drive small business, because I think that's the growth opportunity for South Africa, is around small business. But small business require a competent state that provides the infrastructure, be it telecoms, be it water and reticulation, electricity, so that it can do what it does very, very well. Create wealth for itself, but also for the employees that work for the entrepreneur. So if she's coming with that, I'll be very, very, very excited. Are there any questions? There was a question earlier. I'm not so sure I've answered, that was talking specifically to the change of the economic ministries.
Thanks, Lumkile. Yeah, I think we did cover that. There is a question from Trevor asking, going back to your comments around the new Minister of Finance, why did Ramaphosa appoint Godongwana as Finance Minister? What were his motives in this regard? Was it just to appease the radical economic transformation element within the ANC?
Thank you so much, Trevor. So if you look at what has happened, we just shuffle the pack. So there's really very few injection of new blood there. So we've got Mondi, who's the minister in the presidency, Mondi Gugubele. Some of you might remember him. He was temporarily a deputy minister of finance in the interim, just after Zuma exited, before the elections, when in the first term, if you recall the first term, there was a few months when President Ramaphosa was completing Zuma's term. And Mondi became the deputy minister. He's now a minister in the presidency. That's an extended appointment. Secondly, as you all saw, is that the state security has been moved into the presidency. And I'm very excited to have Sidney Mufumadi. Again, Sidney Mufumadi, for the benefit of those who don't know, he is also a former trade unionist, Deputy General Secretary of COSATU under J. Naidu. J. Naidu was the General Secretary of COSATU then. Him and Ramaphosa, as well as Minister Mantashe, come from the same environment of being trade unionist. Of course, Minister Patel come from that as well. And others come from the Communist Party. Minister Nzimande come from the Communist Party. Minister Nwesi, Minister of Labor, comes from the Communist Party. So what one sees in the reshuffling of the pack is that the president is aligning himself with the so-called left. So what he's done, he's brought in the left much closer. He's brought in COSATU people closer to him. He's brought in SACP people closer to him. And I think his idea, one of the questions that the president had posed to COSATU and SACP was, why do they not have a program of socialism? That's the question that he posed recently. You can Google, I'm not a Trevor, you can Google that question. He put that question to SACP. SACP didn't. So I think these forces, the trade union forces, the SACP forces, are being given an opportunity to act as a buffer and influence the ANC differently. That is, push out, Trevor, the radical economic transformers, because the SACP and COSATU have a worker and a populist people's program. So he is using that platform, that program, to offset radicalism, to say, you know what, these radical economic transformers are self-interested, they're selfish, they want to enrich themselves. You saw them in the past, you continue to see them now. I am with the workers, with the communists who are closer to you people. So therefore, we are carving a new future for South Africa. People centers, left-oriented policies, and look at us. This is us. We're different from these radical economic transformers. So you're correct, Trevor. He's doing this to try and close ranks within what he perceives as progressives and those that may sound maybe a better music in the ears of the South African poor and the marginalized. So it will be easy for him, given the ANC's bad name among many people, to say, actually, although I'm an ANC president, I'm closer to the ANC, to the communists and COSATU than the ANC. So look at me, not only as ANC, look at me holistically as who I am. I'm different from that. So believe in this new dawn I'm talking about, because it's different from these guys. Mine is coated with socialist values that you should be proud of, because we'll be talking about you, housing program, free water, free electricity, all those populist things that the ANC used to talk about. So he's reclaiming space, but he's reclaiming it with the COSATUs and SACP behind him.
So I hear the feedback about the fact that it's maybe more socialistic, and he's trying to get favor in that regard. But what concerned me is what you spoke about, his track record of corruption. That's dangerous. So couldn't he have got someone that was maybe a little bit more on the socialistic side, however, with a clean record?
So maybe, and that leads to a question by Andrew Schill, and if we could, Lumkile, put you on the spot to ask you, if you were president, who would you have as finance minister, and taking into account what you've just told us?
Yeah, so let me answer Trevor first. So Trevor, yes, he has some other people that could have looked up to. And so the governor of the central bank is someone who is ANC through and through, but has never served South Africa as a cadre, Mr. Kganyago. He served South Africa as a central banker with the interest of South Africa first, including financial stability and prudency and accountability. So here's someone. And within the bank, looking at the bank itself, the central bank, there is a lot of black talent. If black is the preference for the president, there's a lot of black talent that could take over from Mr. Kganyago within the bank. So there was really no shortage of that. What Leicester doesn't have is the political head where he'll be hacking ANC agendas. It doesn't have that. Researcher will have SA people's agenda. So he's not the right person accordingly for the president. So what this guy brings, he brings ANC politics. So to an extent, he's a buffer against the RET. So he's someone who's known, who's historically been the ANC, and therefore in the politics and political shenanigans of the ANC, the president will be shielded. So he's really, President Ramaphosa has disappointed many of us, because through this reshuffle, he's put the ANC first. Yes, and he's, of course, his own interest. So he's put his interest first, that not, I want a second term. So in this second term, who can ensure and guard me against the ANC and put these candidates? And so he's really been, his judgment has been clouded by his own ambition, unfortunately. And I'm judging him, and I'll judge him at the voting booth accordingly. That he's just too clouded by ANC politics than South Africa's interest. So the interest of the ANC is prioritized at the expense of the greater South African constitutional order. Just sorry, the second question, I didn't write it down.
Sorry, it was, if not Enoch, then
who? Yes, I've got it. So, colleagues, when countries are in a crisis, like we are as South Africans, so in South Africa, unfortunately, because of our past, we have our industrial and our business class being predominantly white. So this is the legacy that we have in South Africa. And that class that I've described is embedded in global relationships. So, for example, to use the popular radical economic transformation label, if you look at Johann Rupert running a very successful empire, which touches many people's lives. The Rembrandt Group and all its brands touches all of us. So here's a South African champion who's exceptional, who's doing very, very, very well, who should be an asset to the Ramaphosa. If Ramaphosa is talking about economic recovery, about community development, these are the people that are an asset. So what I'm arguing, Joss, is that if I were him, I will look within business. That Joss, your country needs you. Remember that finger, that poster of America. I'll be pointing at you, Joss, to say, your country needs you. And I know, I'm just using finance ministry. It's not finance ministry only. It's the telecoms. We've built, guys, since GSM came in around 93, around then, 93 to date. We've built so much knowledge. We are at the same level as everyone else around digital telecoms. But these pockets of excellence are within your businesses. I'm talking about the bigger businesses now, the telecom businesses, whether MTN, Vodacom, etc. They've got so much knowledge there. And the talent, there we are spoiled because there's a huge black talent. So I'm not talking about here sort of the Rembrandt example I was making, where there's historical knowledge that's been acquired. Here, many of these business leaders came at the same time as everyone else. It's a new industry. So there's black talent there. Put it into your cabinet and create that. So what I'm saying, colleagues, is that here is an opportunity of a country in crisis, incapable regime, an incompetent regime, where the country needs to prioritize capability in rebuilding a construct regime which has been destroyed by the ANC. You look outside the ANC, you call upon South Africans to rise and do what is good for our country. And in doing that, we reconstruct. Everyone knows, there's no secret in South Africa. All of us sitting here today, we know that we're an incompetent regime, an incapable regime. We all know that. It's no secret. So a president who puts his country first will have said, no, you come in, Masako, you come in small business, and then run a successful, you come in and help me. So when you talk to your peers, it's a different conversation. So what I'm saying, colleagues, is that the reshuffling has been very, very disappointing. But even though politically we've got these weaknesses, I want to share with you what the commodity boom has meant for many of us. So many of our companies' balance sheets have improved drastically. I'm talking about many of our miners. Some of you are following today in Business Day. There's a whole article about Northam restructuring. I think they're restructuring that BEE. They could do it because there's cash. So they refinance, they've lots of cash, the balance sheet, they're making it more sustainable in the long term. So I'm saying, colleagues, that in our country, it seems to me that the drivers of change is going to be you and some of us outside the state. We have to be the drivers of change. How do we do that? How do we suddenly, all the stuff I've painted around the politics, etc., how do we do that? How do we suddenly become? You know your space, you know your environment. So do I, where I'm working. So are many of the mining companies that I've talked about. They know what they need to do, and where are the stumbling blocks. So this regime, colleagues, I've said it's incompetent. We are the ones with competence. So our influence should be driven by our own capability, by pushing the states as much as we can to allow us to do business, to provide the infrastructure that we require, as it has done. I mean, the response after the KZN, you have seen the response around the support, that suddenly we've got about 2.3 billion rand support for small business. It's small, it's nothing, but it's a big victory for small business, that if we speak together, we do what we can do very, very well, the state will be pressurized to do what's supposed to do. These are long-term colleagues, because in our country, there are opportunities, despite all the stuff that we saw yesterday and we saw about 3 weeks ago in parts of KZN as well as Gauteng, that we will be the drivers for change. We will determine our destiny. As Mandela said, it is in our hands, not in the hands of Ramaphosa and the ANC. It is us who will drive and determine that change. There are risks, colleagues. There are risks. And one of the biggest risks is the security of property and security of lives. And I think with the introduction of the new security advisor, we're going to move quite a bit, just in terms of restructuring the security cluster. Remember, Dr. Mufumadi had done the review of our security and had put recommendation on what needed to be done. So now he's been brought in to do that. So I'm hoping that in the next few years, we'll see huge improvements in our security, both our property, but our lives as well, as we clean out the bad elements, rebuild these institutions, and provide support to you as entrepreneurs to do what you need to do, safeguarding your property, your lives, making sure that you do what you need to do and get this country going and running again. The ANC will meet us somewhere as we prosper and succeed.
Lumkile, thanks so much. There's a couple of questions that are coming through, and I'm wondering if I can try and get it seems that the common theme, if we talk about, what do we do as entrepreneurs, and the fingers are pointing to us now. Firstly, there's a question here that says, how do we become the drivers of these change? From Sean. Radical thinking around land and business is pushing entrepreneurs away. Clint had mentioned BEE being an obstacle and something that makes business difficult in South Africa. It's, I guess, easy to say, it's up to us to rebuild the economy, but how are we going to do that, and where are we going to see the biggest change that's going to support us in doing that? You started the conversation around what's happening in the US around supporting small business. What's going to happen here? Can we do it on our own?
Yeah. So firstly, we have made huge gains, colleagues. Maybe it might have been overshadowed by the recent events in KZN. The Section 25 amendment has been defeated. And so the ANC has taken a view that there is enough power given by the Constitution to the administration to effect a fair and equitable redistribution of property. So the ANC has come out very strongly around it. I'm not so sure that you missed it, colleagues. So this is based on a report which was done by former President Halima Motlanthe. And he has been able to win the ANC over, together with former President Mbeki, who came out as well very strongly that the amendment of Section 25 is not an ANC position historically. So there's a huge shift within the ANC around Section 25. Of course, colleagues, there'll be noise from the EFF and the radical economic transformers. But all these, we know, they are populists who are only looking after their own interest. They've got no interest of South Africans at heart. So they are spectacles. They are very good at spectacle and showing off and threatening people. But really, they've got no substance in changing the lives of South Africans. So I'm saying, colleagues, that the fear that and the concern that many of us had around the amendment of Section 25, because my biggest concern was that basically this was going to be stealing people's property. That amendment, if it was done, it was going to be enriching a few Black people who have no interest whatsoever in the development of many South Africans and uplifting of many South Africans, which then move us to the discussion around Black economic empowerment. Unfortunately, that debate has to be carried on by Black people. I think Masego here and many other entrepreneurs have to drive that agenda. The Black economic empowerment policies, in my work, in my research, in my PhD research, it is very, very clear that the Black economic empowerment are seeds of rent-seeking, repurposing the state, and enriching a few. So there is a way, there are other ways of empowering. If the idea around empowerment has to be achieved, it rests with a very strong department of small business, with a well supported department whose idea is to support emerging and Black entrepreneurs, in addition to supporting all the entrepreneurs. So we can really do a lot by the state itself prioritizing Black entrepreneurs in terms of support. Not support for taking other people's business as we do at the moment, but support for entrepreneurs who want to do it on their own, through their own effort. So that for me remains a huge opportunity. Unfortunately, because some have seen that through BE, you can have a lavish lifestyle. There are many Black South Africans who prefer that. You prefer just to play golf and live a flashy lifestyle, drink Moët and other delicious drinks that come from Scotland. There is that class that's become real in South Africa, which is a shame. But there are entrepreneurs, Masego and many others, who want to sweat for what they want. So what I'm saying, colleagues, is that the Masegos must drive that discussion around the BE, because at the moment, arguably in my work, I'm arguing very strongly that as it's set up today, it is set up for patronage, for repurposing institution, and capturing many businesses to those who are politically linked. And it's a dangerous concoction for creating a society that is that cares, that is inclusive. So the BE really is making those who are with those access to be richer whilst leaving the masses behind.
Lumkile, one of the questions that are coming through is around what kind of pressure should we as entrepreneurs and small business owners be putting on the new minister, and what should we be looking for from the minister in terms of change that's going to, what are the metrics or the measurements that we're going to decide whether this new minister is going in the right direction, or do we just sit and wait?
So, I mean, there's huge lessons here. So I'm biased, as you're going to hear now. So my biasness is based on my understanding of the SBA. This is the Small Business Administration of the US. So very important that many of you sitting here do have a track record. So there is a case for grant funding for many of you. The modus operandi of how that operates can be worked out. So how the SBA does in terms of its own support, it uses the turnover as a form of giving you support. So they'll use how much sales you have. So the bigger your sales are, then you'll get less. So there's declining scale about the support that they give entrepreneurs as a grant. So the entrepreneur must have had a track record. So I can't appear as an academic and apply to Minister Ndabeni for a 10 million rand loan because I'm running a business, but I've got no track record to show. So those that have got at least a year of training, with some success based on turnover, can get grant support from the SME, from the small business administration. How do you do that? You do that through the department itself understanding what it means to be a small business. That is why my argument earlier that the continuous deployment of politicians in these critical areas that are skills creating and wealth creating is a huge disappointment. That's why in the US you need and you rely on entrepreneurs to come in and run these departments because they know they've been there, they've done that. They know what the issues are. So in the South African case, that's the weakness. That is why I'm saying through the dialogue, hopefully, unlike Ms. Zulu, she'll come closer to us and then we can engage with her, so I'm working through the SBI, the Small Business Institute myself. We've been trying to engage the Minister Zulu with no success. So I'm hoping if Ms. Ndabeni comes to the party, we'll work with her. We've got within the SBI, some of you might be members. You know that we've got you guys who are our members who know exactly what needs to be done. And then through her coming closer to us, we can really work out a number of solutions that will favor a small business administration. But they'll also require the Minister of Finance to put resources into that department. It must not be that's a sideshow. It must be the critical pillar because that's where the future of South Africa lies. It lies on small business, labor creating, wealth creating for opportunities, not only in the deep urban areas, but also some of you in the smaller rural towns, which are collapsing at the moment because of ANC politician incompetence at local level, and therefore services just collapsing.
Thank you, Lumkile. I think there's one question and we've only got 5 minutes left, so perhaps.
No worries.
It was Masejo who's going to be leading our transformation. Wanted to know, what do you think is going to come out of the 12 people that have been supposedly found to have instigated the radical economic transformation events that have happened over the couple of weeks? Can we expect to see any arrests being made, or at least know who they are? Or is that a bit of wishful thinking?
Firstly, let me just say that there's been worrying developments in the past few 24 hours. Some of you might have just read that President Zuma is in hospital. And that's very concerning. I'm hoping that there's no access to visitation there, because if there is, that may be very concerning, because the radical economic transformers continue to organize around him. So if he's out and accessible, he's going to continue doing the work of undermining the constitutional order. Sort of that's a comment I want to make. In response to your question, the difficulty that we're facing is that the National Prosecuting Authority is dependent on the security forces to give it information. So given what I pointed out of a divided security cluster, it is going to be very difficult to find concrete evidence that will enable the prosecuting authority to bring these alleged criminals to book, the plotters. So I'm very concerned. It took very long even to round them up. Masego, I'm concerned that they may well end up going scot-free because there is an interest among those that were supposed to gather information and help prepare a case with the prosecuting authority to do its work. And that incentive, unfortunately, might not have been there, and therefore they may as well go scot-free and no one getting to pay a time in jail.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go. I think last question, and then we'll wrap up.
So my second question earlier was future potential looters that get out of hand, and the government not wanting to be playing to their hands, into the radicals' hands by being too aggressive or such. How do we manage that? How will they manage that in a calm way that doesn't also let them get out of hand?
So what we've done in the new support program announced by the Minister of Finance, we're providing, I think, about 5 billion rand between the defense and the police department. All of it is going towards retraining and retooling. That is capability of managing public order, policing, getting all the necessary equipment of public order management. Some of you might remember, those who are my age, in the 1980s, we used to call it pebble rain. We had these vehicles that look like water carrying trucks or fuel carrying trucks that had water that was pebble, and police will come and disperse us with a spray, with that pebble spray. And if in the afternoon you happen to be walking, I was at Wits, so if after the march at Jordan Street at Wits, I happen to be in the CPD and the cops see a pebble mark on my shirt, they'll arrest me because they know I was there at that march, which led to 3 policemen getting injured or vehicles being banned, whatever things that we got to in the 1980s. So I'm hoping that this retooling and ensuring that there's a proper training of our police is going to ensure that when you deploy police, they act much stronger than they've done in the past few months. We can't rely on rubber bullets, which were not even sufficient for that matter. So we need much more public order equipment, which I think we're ordering now. So we should see much more different action in the next few matches that will be coming in the next few months.
Thank you very much, Lumkile. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to call it there. Lumkile, thank you so much for your insights. I feel like we could carry on talking for the whole day. This has been very insightful. Not some good news, some not so good news. I think the idea behind these talks is for us to firstly be informed, and secondly to understand that any transformation that's going to happen is going to have to come from us, and we're going to have to work together to try and get our businesses back on track and get the economy back on track. We will have, as I mentioned at the beginning, a series of talks. We'd love to have you back in a few months, Lumkile, and hopefully we'll have seen some developments, positive developments in restoring our economy. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in. It's great to see such a great turnout. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.